On the night I turned 18, I came home expecting at least a small family dinner, maybe even a simple cake. Instead, all I found was a frozen pizza sitting on the counter and a cold congrats text dropped in the family group chat. My parents had taken my younger sister out because she was upset, and when I asked why my birthday didn't matter, they shrugged. "You're not really the celebrating type." Just 1 week earlier, they had thrown her a massive Sweet 16 in the backyard with fireworks, lighting up the sky and even a drone, filming every moment for social media. That night, I didn't argue, I didn't eat. I quietly packed my things, walked out, and left their so-called perfect family behind. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible in your own home? And where are you watching this story from today? Hi, my name is Madison Carter, living in the quiet suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts. My family has 4 members. My father, Daniel, a real estate man who always cared about appearances. My mother, Karen, who was constantly busy hosting parties and showering praise on her youngest daughter, and my sister Sophia, 16 years old. From the time I was very young, I could clearly feel the difference in how my parents treated me compared to Sophia. It started with small details that seemed harmless. Sophia was taken to her ballet lessons every week without fail, while I would sit in the living room corner with a book. Sophia also had piano and violin lessons, and my mother would often boast that her hands were born to play music. Pictures of Sophia in puffy dresses, smiling brightly on stage, were framed and hung proudly on the living room wall as proof of her perfection. And me? I loved reading, spending hours at the school library, or tinkering with old computers the neighbors had thrown away. But in my parents' eyes, none of that was worth showing off. I often heard their dismissive laughter. "Madison is always buried in books and machines. She doesn't know how to enjoy life." That label stuck to me like an invisible tag throughout my childhood, the child who doesn't know how to have fun. Birthdays were the clearest evidence of their favoritism. I still remember my 6th birthday, a small cake bought from the supermarket with "Happy Birthday, Madison" written in messy frosting. Only my parents, Sophia, and a few quickly lit candles on the dinner table. No balloons, no friends, no music. I blew out the candles myself, cut the cake, and then the family quickly shifted the conversation back to my father's work. Meanwhile, 2 years later, Sophia's 8th birthday was hosted in a professional children's studio. She wore a princess gown, had her makeup done, posed for photos, and even had a backup dance team performing for her. I sat in the corner, quietly watching, feeling like I was attending the birthday of some child star, not my own little sister. I had asked my parents many times why there was such a difference. Once, when I was 10 years old, I gathered all my courage and asked my mother, "Why does she always get more than me? Why is my birthday just a tiny cake?" My mother looked at me and laughed, as if I had just asked something ridiculous. "You're not the type who likes parties. You like books, you like quiet, don't you? That's why a simple birthday suits you best." I stayed silent, but inside I felt a wave of bitterness I couldn't describe. It wasn't that I disliked parties, it was that I had never been given the chance to know whether I liked them or not. My father added, "You should be proud that you're different. Sophia is outgoing, you're introverted. Each child has their own way." But his tone made it clear that being outgoing was something to be proud of, while being introverted was just an excuse to justify being left behind. The memory of when I was 13 is etched deeply into me. Sophia had her birthday at a fancy restaurant in downtown Boston, complete with an MC and a violin performance by one of her friends. I sat in the crowd, wearing an old dress my mother had told me, "That's enough for you, you don't need anything fancy." Throughout the party, relatives and friends kept showering Sophia with praise. Beautiful, talented, radiant. No one asked how I was doing in school, or what I liked. I felt like a stranger, dragged there only to fill an empty seat. I also remember my 15th birthday. That day, I hoped at the very least my parents would prepare a warm family dinner or a small meaningful gift. But when I came home, All I found was a pastry sitting on the kitchen counter, still in its unopened plastic container, probably picked up from the supermarket on their way back. Sophia looked at me and smirked. "See? You really don't like parties. One cake is enough for you." I forced a smile, but inside I was breaking apart. That night, when I blew out the single candle on that cheap cake, I wished that someday I could have a birthday like Sophia's just once. The older I grew, the sharper the comparisons became. Sophia was allowed to join every art club, while when I asked to join the robotics club at school, my mother brushed it aside. "What does a girl need with machines? That won't help you stand out." When I won second place in a school programming competition, my parents only said, "Good, but too bad it's not first place." Meanwhile, all Sophia had to do was perform a short ballet at the spring festival, and my parents would record it, send the video to every friend and neighbor they knew. I gradually understood that in their eyes, nothing I achieved would ever be enough, while Sophia only had to show up to be praised. There was a time when I tried to push back. One evening, right after Sophia proudly announced she had landed the lead role in the school play, I spoke up. "It's always about Sophia. No one ever cares about me." The atmosphere at the dinner table instantly turned tense. My mother frowned. "Madison, don't be selfish. Your sister has talent. You should be proud of her instead of jealous." My father tapped his spoon against the table. "You need to accept that everyone has different roles. Your sister likes attention, you don't. That's why it's normal for us to treat you differently." Those words felt like the final nail in the coffin of all my attempts to demand fairness. From that day on, I learned to swallow my tears, never asking again, but deep down I knew my silence itself was the proof of the injustice I had to endure. My childhood passed in the shadow of Sophia, surrounded by extravagant parties where I was only allowed to stand on the sidelines. I never hated my sister, but the blatant favoritism turned us from siblings into two opposing worlds. One was the center of the universe, the other just a faint shadow. And no matter how hard I tried, I was forever trapped in the role of the child who doesn't like parties, who doesn't know how to enjoy life. The truth was, no one had ever given me the chance to know what it felt like to enjoy any of it. A week before my 18th birthday, the Carter house was buzzing like a festival. Sophia had just turned 16, and for my parents, that was a milestone too important to miss. From early morning, the backyard was alive with activity. The event companies strung lights along the fence, built balloon arches, and set up glittering backdrops with the words "Sweet 16" shining in metallic gold right in the center. My father busied himself walking around giving orders, while my mother inspected every tray of pastries and every bouquet of pink and white roses arranged to perfection. I was there too, but only in the role of an unpaid helper. I carried boxes, set up tables, wiped down chairs, and ran back and forth. Each time I asked if I could take part in some part of the program, the only answer I ever got was, "Madison, step aside, don't get in the way." As the sun set, the backyard lit up like a stage. Sophia's friends arrived, dressed to impress, their makeup flawless. Laughter and shouts mingled with the beats of the DJ my parents had hired. I stood in the shadows near the fence, still holding a trash bag I had just collected. Then I saw a fleet of drones lift off, their little lights flickering in the sky like mechanical fireflies. The drone operator angled the camera down, capturing Sophia as she stepped out of the house in a sparkling silver princess dress. The crowd clapped and cheered all at once. Sophia smiled, waving like a celebrity, then embraced the giant bouquet of flowers my mother handed her. I overheard someone whisper, "It feels like a party for a star." Double lip. That night the fireworks exploded across the sky. Ribbons of red, gold, and purple unfurled above our house, leaving behind drifting silver smoke. I tilted my head up and felt a mix of beauty and a tightness in my chest. It was my sister's birthday, but I felt like I didn't belong there at all. No one in the crowd glanced my way, no one noticed I had stood there for hours. I quietly collected crushed cans and scattered wrapping paper, trying not to let my tears fall in front of the guests. After everyone left, the house still glowed under the stage lights that hadn't been taken down. I rolled up my sleeves and helped my mother clear the tables and wipe the glasses. My father and Sophia were busy taking more photos to post on social media, and my mother, exhausted, still smiled because the party had been perfect. I stuffed the trash into the bin, my shirt damp with sweat, my arms aching. By the time we finished, it was almost midnight. I went up to my room, sat on the bed, and opened my phone. There was a missed call from my grandmother, Margaret. I called her back right away. Her voice was hoarse but warm in my ear. "Madison, are you okay?" Just hearing that made my eyes sting. I didn't dare tell her everything, so I answered vaguely, "I'm fine, Grandma. My sister had a party tonight." She was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. "I know. But don't forget, you have your own worth. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." I pressed my lips together to hold back a sob and whispered, "Grandma, sometimes I feel invisible in this house." She replied immediately, firmly, "No, Madison. In my eyes you are a light, they just can't see it. Remember, you deserve love and respect." My 18th birthday began like any other ordinary day. I went to school with a detached feeling, not daring to expect much, yet deep down I still held on to a fragile hope. I didn't need fireworks, I didn't need drones, I didn't even need hundreds of guests like Sophia. I was grown now, and all I wished for was to come home to find my parents had prepared a simple dinner, maybe a small cake, a few candles, or just the family gathered around, looking at me and saying, "Happy birthday, Madison." After 18 years, I wanted to believe that at least on that day something would be different, some small sign that I truly belonged in this family. That afternoon, I carried my backpack home and walked into the kitchen. The room was unusually silent. No smell of food, no voices, no one waiting. On the counter, the only thing in sight was a frozen pizza still in its packaging, carelessly placed next to a small note. "Congratulations, daughter." My mother's hurried handwriting tilted across the paper as if written while she was in the middle of something else. I stood frozen, staring at the note, feeling like someone had just poured a bucket of cold water over me. The only thing I received on my 18th birthday, the most important milestone of my coming of age, was a hastily bought supermarket pizza and a careless scribble. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, a new notification in the family group chat. A message from my father. "Congrats." That was it. No, "How was your day?" No, "We love you." No warmth, just a cold emoji sent out of obligation. My chest tightened. My fingers trembled as I typed something back, then deleted it. I waited, hoping for another message, a phone call, anything. But the screen stayed silent. Not one of them remembered that this was the most important day of my life. Finally, I called my mother. Her voice came through the line, not warm or attentive, but busy and distant. "Hello, what is it, Madison?" I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, today is my birthday. Why is no one home? Why did you just leave a pizza?" There was a short silence, then she answered with a casual tone as if what she said made perfect sense. "Your sister is upset, you know that. We went out to eat so she would be happier. You're not the type who likes parties, so pizza suits you." I froze. Those words cut into my chest like a knife. For years they had used "you don't like parties" to excuse their indifference. But today, when I was finally 18, when I needed to be seen as a real part of this family, they did not change. My grandmother's voice from last week echoed in my head. "Don't forget you have worth." But in that moment those words felt impossibly far away. Tears began to spill, falling onto the cold kitchen counter. I tried to say one more thing, hoping my mother would understand. "Mom, am I not worthy of having a day of my own?" On the other end there was only a short sigh, and then my mother cut me off. "Madison, don't make a scene. We'll talk later. I have to go now." The call ended with a click, leaving me alone in the empty kitchen. I stared at the frozen pizza, the only birthday gift I had. I could not eat, could not swallow a single bite. My throat tightened and my chest ached as if I had been erased from the world. I sank into a chair and buried my face, sobbing. It was not only the abandonment of that day that broke me, but the brutal realization that for 18 years I had never truly been seen as a child of this family. I had been a shadow, a supporting character, the one who filled the empty spaces of the perfect family they wanted to show the world. That night the house was terrifyingly silent. I could hear laughter drifting in from the street, surely from another family celebrating their child's birthday. I wished I could be in a home like that, where laughter meant love, not empty words sent through a group chat. I curled up on my bed, my pillow soaked with tears, and in my head one unanswered question kept echoing. Do I really matter to anyone? After crying until my eyes were swollen, I sat up in the darkness of my bedroom. My heart was still heavy, but inside me rose a decision I had never dared to think of before. I opened my small closet, pulled out a suitcase, and quietly began packing the essentials. A few faded shirts, old jeans, and a thick coat for the freezing Boston winter. I added my old laptop, the one I always used for homework and for teaching myself programming, slipping it into my backpack. Finally, I carefully opened a drawer and took out a small wooden box holding a few keepsakes, a photo of me with my grandmother Margaret when I was little, a notebook she once gave me to record the important things in life, and a simple silver necklace she had given me on my 16th birthday. Each item I took with me was not just material, but a part of myself, things that proved I still had worth, that someone loved me. I left no note for my parents. I knew that to them, whether I stayed or left would make no difference. Perhaps they would even feel relieved not to bear the burden of a child who doesn't know how to enjoy life. Quietly, I latched the suitcase, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and stepped out of the room where I had lived for 18 years without ever truly feeling I belonged. The house was pitch dark, the streetlights spilling its glow across the wall lined with photos of Sophia. I passed through the living room where the largest photo hung. Sophia in her princess dress from the Sweet 16 party, smiling brightly with fireworks exploding behind her. I stopped for a few seconds, looked at that picture, and realized I had left no mark in this house except for a few old books and the corners where I had once sat and cried. A wave of pain and release surged through me. I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it gently behind me without looking back. Boston at night was quiet, the wind whispering through the trees along the street. I walked with my suitcase to the bus stop not far from home. Each step felt heavy, then gradually lighter. At the stop, I sat on the cold bench, my palms damp with sweat. Part of me trembled with fear. Where would I go? How would I live? Was I making a mistake? But another part of me whispered, Madison, you are not invisible anymore. You are rewriting your life. Action 9. When the bus arrived, I climbed on, stowed my suitcase in the luggage compartment, and sat down by the window. The yellow streetlights cast shifting bands of light and shadow across my face. The bus pulled away from the familiar neighborhood where I had spent my childhood. I pressed my forehead to the glass and watched the houses recede one by one. Each roof, each fence brought back a memory. The times I was left inside while Sophia was taken to ballet class, the hollow birthdays, the nights I longed to hear a sincere, happy birthday. Tears ran down my cheeks, but this time they were not only pain, they were release. The farther we went, the city lights began to emerge, sparkling like another sky unfolding before me. A strange new faith kindled inside my chest. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I no longer had to wait for a shard of affection from people who would never give it. I leaned my head against the cold glass and felt the steady vibration of the bus beneath me. With tears still on my face, I allowed myself a small smile. It was not the smile of complete joy, but the smile of someone who had just set down a burden she had carried for years, even though the road ahead was uncertain. That night, for the first time in 18 years, I felt I had the right to choose. My choice was to leave a place that had been called home but had never truly belonged to me. The city lights faded behind us and darkness and a new road stretched ahead. In that moment, I whispered to myself, I will find a place, a family, and a life that are truly mine. And that was the beginning of everything. The bus took me to the central station, and from there I caught another ride to Quincy, where my grandparents Margaret and Robert lived in the red brick house that had been part of my childhood. The road leading there was so familiar that even though I hadn't visited in a long time, I still remembered every curve and every row of trees. When the bus stopped, I pulled my suitcase down and stepped off. The night wind in Quincy brushed against my face cold, yet carrying a strange sense of home. I walked along the quiet street until I saw, in the distance, the red roof and the familiar porch of my grandparents' house. Warm yellow light spilled from the living room window, a sight so completely different from the cold darkness I had just left behind. I stood at the door, my heart racing. My hand trembled as I pressed the doorbell. Moments later came the sound of shuffling slippers, and then the door opened. My grandmother appeared, her silver hair neatly tied back, her face a mix of surprise and worry when she saw me, eyes swollen from crying, face gaunt, suitcase dragging behind me. "Madison? What are you doing here at this hour?" Her voice shook. A moment later, my grandfather Robert stepped out too, his expression stricken with alarm. "Granddaughter, what on earth has happened to you?" I could not hold it in any longer. All the restraint of years, all the pain from the frozen pizza, from the cold congrats in the group chat, from the indifferent line, "You're not the type who likes parties," it all shattered. I collapsed, sobbing loudly on the doorstep, clutching my suitcase as if it were the last lifeline I had. Grandma hurriedly wrapped her arms around me, her hands trembling but gentle. Grandpa took the suitcase and pulled me inside. "Come in, Madison. You don't have to suffer alone anymore." Oboe. In the warm living room, with the faint scent of chamomile tea, I sat between them and cried until I could not stop. I told them everything, from Sophia's lavish 16th birthday to the nights I cleaned up while the whole world revolved around her. And then to my 18th birthday when I came home to find only a frozen pizza and a careless note. I told them about calling my mother and hearing the cold explanation that the family went out to cheer Sophia up because I wasn't the type who liked parties. Each sentence cut into my heart like another wound, but it was also the first time I dared to lay down the burden. My voice broke as I whispered the question that had haunted me for so long. Am I not worthy of love, Grandma? Is it wrong that I always feel like a shadow in my own family? She pulled me closer, whispering into my ear. "No, Madison. You were never wrong. You are not alone. You are our blood, our pride, they just can't see it. You deserve love, you deserve care, and you will have it." At that moment, my grandfather Robert placed his hand on my shoulder, his gaze stern but warm. He sighed and spoke in a low, thoughtful voice. "Madison, there is something you need to know. For many years your father's real estate company has survived only because of financial support from us. We have quietly poured money in, covered the gaps to keep him standing proud in the Boston community. That is why he has been able to hold his head high and boast about a perfect family. But, after what we saw tonight, after what you have had to endure, we will not do that anymore." I looked up at him, my eyes rimmed in red. "You mean?" He nodded firmly. "From now on, not another dollar will be sent to that company. We cannot continue to feed favoritism and cruelty. If they choose to build a family on injustice and falsehood, then they must face the consequences themselves." Those words cracked the heavy sky inside me like thunder. For the first time in my life, I felt someone openly take my side, not merely comforting me over the phone or offering gentle words, but acting for real. I burst into tears, but this time they were not only for the pain, they were for the relief. I was no longer fighting alone in the dark. They opened their arms and welcomed me to stay. Grandma led me up to the small room on the second floor where I used to sleep during summer visits when I was a child. The room still held the old wooden bed, the faded floral curtains, and the stuffed bear she had bought me at the fair. She said, "From now on, this will be your place. Here you will be loved unconditionally." I hugged the stuffed bear, tears streaming down, and felt a small flame of hope kindle in my heart. That night I lay in that small room, and for the first time in years I felt like I truly had a home. My grandparents' decision was more than cutting off a stream of money. It was a turning point that would set off a chain of consequences. The perfect family my parents had built was about to begin cracking. But more than that, it was the night I realized I was no longer invisible. I was Madison, and I had value. In the days that followed, my life began a new chapter. Every morning, I took the bus from Quincy into downtown Boston for school, and in the afternoons I stopped by a small cafe near Boston Common to work part-time. The cafe wasn't big, just a few wooden tables, a cozy little bar, and bookshelves along the walls, but it was always filled with students and tourists. I worked behind the counter making simple drinks, clearing tables, and sometimes helping in the kitchen with pastries. At first, I worried whether I would do well, but gradually I found my rhythm in the steady hum of the coffee grinder, the warm smell of waffles drifting through the air, and the lively chatter of customers. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to buy books, cover bus fare, and, more importantly, give me the feeling that I was standing on my own 2 feet. In the evenings, when I returned to my grandparents' house in Quincy, I often found Grandpa Robert sitting in the living room with his newspaper, while Grandma Margaret waited with a warm meal ready for me. They never bombarded me with questions. Instead, they gently asked, "Anything fun happen at the cafe today, Madison?" Or, "Are you tired, sweetheart?" Those simple questions meant more to me than all the hollow compliments my parents had ever showered on Sophia. One evening, as I told them about a customer who ordered the wrong drink and how the whole cafe burst into laughter, Grandma took my hand and softly said, "See, you do know how to enjoy life. They were wrong when they said you didn't. You just were never given the chance to show it." I laughed, realizing her words were like erasing the label, "doesn't know how to enjoy life," that I had carried through all of childhood. My grandparents also kept encouraging me to dream bigger. Grandpa often told me, "Madison, you have a sharp mind, you should apply for scholarships. Don't be afraid of rejection, just try." Grandma added, "You have the right to dream big. Don't let the past hold you back." Hearing them, I began researching technology scholarship programs, spending hours each night writing essays and refining every sentence. For the first time, I felt I was walking on my own path, not Sophia's shadow, not a side character in the Carter family. At the cafe, I met Veronica, a girl my age who worked the evening shifts like me. Veronica had curly brown hair, bright eyes, and a radiant smile that seemed to light up the whole place whenever she walked in. We quickly became close friends after a few late nights cleaning the cafe together. She was the first person to ask me the kind of small questions no one in my family had ever bothered to ask. "What do you like? Who do you want to become?" One time, when I hesitantly mentioned my dream of studying computer science, Veronica patted my shoulder and said, "You have to follow it, Madison. Don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough. Look at me, I'm studying art even though everyone says it's useless. Dreams are ours, not theirs." Eyes 10. We often stayed after work, sipping hot cocoa and sharing our plans for the future. Veronica painted, I programmed 2 different paths bound by the same belief that we could break free from the grip of unreasonable expectations. I felt lucky, because beyond my grandparents, I now had a friend who truly saw my worth. Of course, the past didn't let me go so easily. Every now and then, my phone buzzed with messages from my parents. They never carried concern, only sharp little jabs. "Hope you're enjoying your job wiping tables." Or, "Sophia was just chosen as team leader at school. Do you ever wonder how much you're falling behind?" Reading them made my chest tighten, but instead of reacting, I chose silence. I had learned that my silence was my greatest strength. I no longer needed to prove anything to them. There was one time Sophia messaged me directly. "Do you miss home? I think you left just to get attention." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting, then I locked my phone without replying. I didn't need to explain myself to someone who had never once tried to understand me. The only answer I could give was to keep living, keep moving forward, and let my existence speak for itself. During those months, I felt myself changing. I learned how to manage my own money, how to balance school and work, how to savor the smallest moments like when a customer complimented a drink I made, Or when my scholarship essay got positive feedback from a teacher. I was no longer the girl crying in her bedroom over a frozen pizza. I was growing up, step by step, under the shelter of my grandparents and the friendship of Veronica. One afternoon after my shift at the cafe, I sat down on a familiar wooden bench in the park, sipping a steaming cappuccino when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old classmate, along with a link to a social media post. "Madison, have you seen this yet?" I opened it, and the words on the screen made my heart sink. My father's real estate company, the very pride he had always flaunted to the entire Boston community, was on the brink of bankruptcy. The cause was not only the difficult economic climate but also a series of financial scandals that were exposed. People discovered the company had falsified reports, used borrowed funds to cover losses, and there were even opaque payments tied to real estate projects. The news spread quickly. Local papers and several major Boston outlets ran stories. The name Daniel Carter, once associated with the image of a successful man, now appeared alongside phrases like financial investigation and risk of bankruptcy. I sat there looking at the screen, and there was none of the gloating satisfaction an outsider might expect. All I felt was an inevitable collapse, like a building erected on rotten ground that was bound to fall. It wasn't just the company. Our family, or rather the family they like to parade as perfect, began to fracture publicly. I heard from neighbors about arguments between my mother and Sophia that spilled into the street, no longer hidden behind a polished facade. Once, Margaret, a neighbor close to my grandparents, called me with a voice equal parts shocked and pained. "Madison, your mother and Sophia were arguing in the yard yesterday. Sophia screamed that she's being forced into a field she doesn't want, that she's only a tool for your father to show off." She smashed her phone and ran out while neighbors watched. Not long after, I saw Sophia's post on social media with my own eyes. She, the child once treated like a priceless gem, penned a long, furious message, accusing our parents of forcing her into studies to protect the family's reputation, claiming that all her successes were orchestrated, not chosen. "I was never allowed to live for myself," Sophia wrote, "and now I choose to walk away from it all." The post spread rapidly, gathering hundreds of comments. Many who had once envied Sophia now turned and condemned our family as a sham. The photos my mother once posted, lavish parties, luxurious trips, smiling family portraits, have now become objects of ridicule. People compare those shining images with the messy reality and mock. The perfect Carter family, it turns out, was just a glossy coat of paint. I read those comments and felt my chest grow heavy. I did not feel triumphant, nor did I feel crushed. I felt exhausted. It turned out all the years I felt invisible were only to help prop up that illusion of a perfect family. And now that the illusion has shattered, they have nothing left to cling to. One evening after my shift at the cafe, I sat with Veronica. She opened her phone and handed it to me. "Have you seen this? This is the latest about your father's company." I glanced at it and saw the headline in bold. "Carter Real Estate on the brink of collapse. Boston's former pride falls." I set my cup of cocoa down and exhaled quietly. I knew this day would come. They lost what they used to be proud of by their own hands. Veronica looked at me, as if expecting me to feel some sort of satisfaction, but I just shook my head. I don't want to see them suffer, but I also don't have the strength to save them. They chose this path. I remembered the look in my grandfather's eyes when he said, "From now on, we will no longer provide support." Back then, I couldn't imagine the consequences arriving so quickly. But now, seeing the broken remains of the Carter family, I understood that my grandparents' decision was more than cutting off finances. It forced my parents to face reality. Without money to cover the cracks, the internal fractures and false image lay bare. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves covered the sidewalks in Quincy, I returned from school and saw a familiar car parked in front of my grandparents' house. My heart sank for a moment. It had been a long time since I had seen them face to face. My father, my mother, and Sophia stepped out. They looked far more worn down than the polished figures they once were. My father wore a wrinkled old suit, his graying hair revealing age and fatigue. My mother still kept her neat appearance, but worry lines etched deep across her face. Sophia, once the shining star, now wore a dark sweater, her eyes downcast, stripped of all pride. They entered the house with an air of half-hearted remorse, but I could sense calculation in their movements. It was clear from the start. This was not a visit of genuine apology, but a last attempt to plead for my grandparents' help. When we all sat down in the living room, my mother spoke first, her voice trembling. "We've been apart too long. Madison, you look so much more grown up. We think it's time to mend the family." My father sat beside her, nodding, though in his eyes flickered a strain that betrayed another intention. I stayed silent, just listening, because I knew what was coming next. And, as I had predicted, after a few minutes of beating around the bush, my father finally said it plainly. "The company is in trouble. If there is more support, we can salvage it. Grandparents, we are family, and family must get through this together." I watched my grandfather clench his hands, his eyes flashing with anger, yet he remained silent, waiting. My mother interjected. "If Madison comes back, if the family reunites, we can get everything back. The perfect Carter family can return." Sophia sighed dramatically, her voice full of melodrama. "We need you, Madison. You have to come back so everything can be like before. I cannot bear this pressure alone." Hearing that, I almost laughed. The family that had abandoned me was now using pressure as an excuse to place on my shoulders the responsibility of saving their old illusion. But instead of getting angry like before, I sat quietly, calmer than I had ever been. I looked them straight in the eye, my voice slow but certain. "I did not leave. I chose to love myself. And I will not return just to keep up a fake perfect family." My parents fell silent, and Sophia bowed her head. I continued. "I am no longer responsible for sacrificing myself to cover up your mistakes. I have spent 18 years invisible in this house, and I will not let that happen again." The air in the room grew heavy. At last, my grandfather Robert spoke, his voice more forceful than I had ever heard. "Enough. Daniel, Karen, we have stayed silent far too long. The mistake is not Madison's, it is yours. You favored, abandoned, and belittled her, and now you expect her to return to save your reputation? How dare you call that a family?" My grandmother Margaret gripped my hand tightly and added, "For years, we quietly poured money in to keep your company afloat. That very shielding fed this illusion. But we stopped, and we will never continue. These are your consequences, not Madison's." My parents looked as if they had been struck by lightning. My father tried to justify himself, his voice breaking. "Robert, Margaret, we only wanted what was best for the family." But my grandfather cut him off instantly. "Best? You call it best when you abandon your eldest daughter on her 18th birthday with nothing but a frozen pizza and a careless message? No. You never understood what best truly means." Sophia sat in silence, her eyes flickering with unease as she glanced at me. In them I saw not only envy, but also a hint of panic the first time she was forced to face the truth that her role as the family's star was crumbling. I said nothing more. I simply smiled softly. It was not a smile of challenge, nor of revenge. It was the smile of someone who had finally found release. In that moment, I felt the balance of power had completely shifted. Once, I was the child dismissed, invisible, always pushed to the sidelines. They were the powerful and proud, sitting high above me. Now, they were the ones pleading, and I, with the support of my grandparents and the strength I had found within myself, sat steady in my own seat without trembling, without fear. I stood and spoke my final words before leaving the living room. "I hope one day you will learn to take responsibility for what you've done, but I am no longer part of that perfect family game. I've chosen my own path, and I will keep walking it." Behind me, I heard my parents' fragmented voices arguing, but it all grew distant, fading away. Inside me, there was only the calm of someone who had finally stepped out of an invisible cage to affirm her own worth. After that confrontation, I returned to my daily routine, but I felt lighter than ever before. I was no longer haunted by the need to prove my value to my parents. Instead, I poured all my energy into my studies and my dreams. Long nights in the little study room on the second floor of my grandparents' red brick house, I wrote, revised, and sent out scholarship applications. Whenever the stress mounted, I remembered the trust in Grandma Margaret's eyes and the words of Grandpa Robert, "You have the right to dream big." That faith became my driving force, even when my eyes were ringed with fatigue from lack of sleep. Then, one spring morning, a thick envelope arrived from New York. My hands trembled as I tore it open, my vision blurring as I read the bold letters. "Congratulations, Madison Carter. You have been awarded a full scholarship for the computer science program at Columbia University." I screamed so loudly that my grandparents rushed in from the living room, startled. When I held the letter out to them in excitement, my grandmother threw her arms around me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I knew you could do it." My grandfather, usually calm and reserved, laughed out loud and patted my shoulder. "My granddaughter, finally the world recognizes you." That good news felt like a brand new beginning. I spent the following months preparing for my journey to New York. My grandparents went with me to buy a new suitcase, warm clothes, and all the essentials I would need. Each time we passed the train station, my heart raced with both excitement and nerves. I was about to leave Quincy, leaving behind the shelter of their familiar embrace, to step into a completely different path, a journey I had chosen for myself, no longer forced or denied by anyone. The day of farewell finally came. That morning, the station was crowded with people rushing back and forth, announcements echoing across the hall, footsteps blending with the rattle of suitcase wheels over the tiled floor. I stood beside my luggage, heart pounding, trying to swallow my nerves. My grandparents stood on either side, each holding one of my hands. My grandmother, her soft silver hair framing her face, looked at me for a long time as if to memorize every detail. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it to me with trembling hands. "This is something I wrote for you a long time ago," my grandmother said, her voice raspy yet full of warmth. "I want you to keep it with you, especially when you feel unsteady." I opened the envelope, and inside was a handwritten letter. The blue ink slightly smudged. Her handwriting was soft, familiar. "My dearest Madison, do not let anyone define you. You are not a shadow of anyone, nor the cruel words you once heard. You write your own worth, each day, with your own hands and heart. When you feel lost, remember that you have never been invisible in my eyes. You are light, and the world needs that light. Walk forward and live for yourself. With love, Grandma." How was I? Tears spilled onto the page as I folded it back and pressed it tightly to my chest. "I promise, Grandma," I whispered, "I will write my own worth." My grandfather placed his hand on my shoulder, his eyes steady. "Go, Madison, and don't be afraid. The whole world is waiting for you." When the announcement called passengers to board, I took a deep breath and hugged my grandparents one last time. I didn't know what the future in New York would hold, perhaps hardship, perhaps loneliness, but I knew one thing for certain. This time, I wasn't running away, I was moving forward. I pulled my suitcase and stepped through the doorway into the train. The doors closed behind me, separating me from their familiar embrace. Through the train window, I saw my grandparents still standing there, waving, growing smaller as the train pulled away. I raised my hand to wave back, tears blurring my vision, but a smile spread across my face. It was not the forced smile I once used to hide pain, but the smile of new faith. Outside the window, the scenery shifted quickly: trees, rooftops, then an entire city unfolding. I knew challenges lay ahead, but so did opportunities to discover who I truly was. Looking back, I could see clearly that everything had begun with one small but brutal moment: my 18th birthday. While my friends were being thrown grand celebrations, I returned to a dark, empty house to find nothing but a cold pizza and a hurried note. Yet it was that very carelessness that pushed me to step out of the cycle of injustice. It taught me that sometimes, to find yourself, you must dare to leave the place called home that was never truly a home. In those first days living with my grandparents, I realized that real love never comes with conditions. They didn't praise me to show off to neighbors, and they didn't demand perfection in exchange for affection. They were simply there listening, trusting, and encouraging me to dream big. That trust carried me all the way to the gates of a university in New York. That trust filled the emptiness I once thought could never be mended. When news broke that my father's company had collapsed and the family once held up as a model became a laughingstock, I did not feel elated. I only sighed. I understood that the greatest price to pay was not the scornful gaze of strangers, but the fact that they would have to live with the truth that the illusion of a perfect family had crumbled right before their eyes. As for me, the one who had been belittled and abandoned, I found freedom not because they failed, but because I chose not to let them control my heart anymore. That is the greatest lesson I want to share with anyone listening to this story. No one, not even your blood family, has the right to define your worth. You are not the invisible child. You are not the sacrificial one who exists only to make others shine. You are not a pale shadow of a life half-lived. Your value does not lie in other people's eyes. It lies in the way you choose to walk your own path. I realized that healing is not about waiting to see them fall. It is not about savoring the moment when parents beg for forgiveness or when a sibling loses her crown. Healing comes when you can lift your head, smile, and say, "I do not need that anymore. I have found myself." That is when your heart is no longer chained by judgment or favoritism. That is when you are truly free. And now, as I begin my new life in New York, I know the road ahead will not be easy. There will be challenges, there will be loneliness. But unlike before, I no longer walk in despair. I walk with the belief that each day I am writing my own worth, with knowledge, with friendship, and with the dreams I dared to hold on to. If you are listening to this story, perhaps somewhere within it, you see yourself maybe as the child who is always compared, maybe as the one forgotten in the family, or maybe simply as the one who always had to sacrifice for others. I want to tell you this: you are not alone. You can choose to stand up, to walk forward, and to love yourself. Do not let anyone define who you are. Write your own story. So, I want to ask you, the one following this story: have you ever been treated as invisible in your own family? And where are you watching this story from?